What's up everybody, Fuller here, welcome back to the channel, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I made this. So this is my little Running Man game, but I made this because I wanted to show you how you can take one stereo audio file, in this case a music track, and with the Metasound wave players, chop that up and use it in different arrangements. Isolate the verse, the chorus, the bridge, and then use your player triggers to change which section of the song you're in musical time, and also trigger an end time stinger at the end. Because a lot of times, you know, it's ideal if we have stems and we have arrangements specifically written for video games, but in this case I just took a production track that I made for CBS Sports and I diced it up in a way that I could actually, each lane has a different section. So you'll see here, the first lane is a verse, the second lane, when you jump in the second lane, it goes to the chorus, and then the third lane, it goes over to the bridge, and then back and forth, and then when you jump on the staircase at the end, it triggers the ending. Now, how do we do this? Let's jump in and I'll show you. For the most part, the blueprint is pretty simple. However, the Metasound is very complicated. Now, fair warning here, this video is a little bit more on the advanced side, and this Metasound is quite a bit complicated. So this video is not for the faint of heart. However, if you're interested in learning more of the basics of Metasounds, go check out my previous videos, Metasounds 101 Basics, Metasound Synthesis, and all that stuff. It'll get you up to speed there. But in this video, I'm not going to rebuild this thing, because if I rebuilt this thing, this video would be 3 hours long. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through the logic and some of the unique features that I used in Metasounds, okay? So first thing I want to do is I want to show you the track that I'm using. So this is a track that I made and for sports highlights, and it's just a rock track. It sounds like this. So this is kind of the intro section, and then it picks up and it gets bigger, and then it has kind of a breakdown section as well. So what I wanted to do with this track is I wanted to isolate 3 aspects of that track. But the first question I have is, how do you figure out which sections of the song you want to use? So let's dive into a Metasound real quick. I'm going to create a new Metasound here, and this isn't part of the tutorial, but I just want to show you how. Let's call this Slice and Dice. I just want to show you how I conceptually figured out how I wanted to arrange this. So what I want to do is I want to pull in a wave player, okay? Stereo 2-channel wave player. And I'm just going to use mono for this for the sake of time, but and let's find that track. And then when I hit play, you hear the track. Now, here's the thing. What I did is I took this track in my DAW and I put cue points in it, markers if you will, so that now this wave player can output those cue points. Those cue points are important because with those cue points, I'm also going to find out where the playback location of the wave file is. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up 4 different wave players with the same audio file. Okay, we're using one asset here. So the challenge is how to use one asset for all these arrangements. So I'm going to pull in 4 wave players, and in each wave player I'm going to loop just a different section, and then we're going to make triggers to activate each section. But how do we figure out where to start and stop the track? If you did that by trial and error, if you just sit here and messed around with this, it would take forever. So what's cool about this wave player is you can tell it where in the wave you want to start. In this case, we're starting at the beginning. Where in the wave you want to start looping, and where how long you want the loop to be. Now this is helpful because in theory, I could just jump to this part. So for example, let's say I wanted to jump, let's say here's the beginning. But let's say I wanted to skip that drum fill. If I change this to 1.56, check this out. Starts right on the downbeat of the song. If I change this to 26.5, it starts on the B section, which I would consider the chorus. And if I start this at 42.08, it'll start on the bridge. And then if I started on 57.66, that's the ending. So you can tell the wave player where you want to start, but that's not the hard part. The trick is figuring out where that point is. So I'm going to show you a couple hacks, a few tricks if you will, to figure out in your stereo audio file exactly where this is happening. Now, a long time ago, actually one of the first videos I ever published on Metasounds, I was talking about cue points and how to access cue points as inputs and how to use Logic Pro to export cue points. Now, you can go back and watch that video because I don't want to spend too much time on cue points because I've already covered that. But let me just tell you this. In my song, I have cue points, and those cue points are going to trigger. This is going to trigger every time the file gets to a cue point. It's going to tell me the name of the cue point, and more importantly, it's going to tell me the playback time, which is the absolute playback time of the wave. And then I want to read these results. So how do I do this? Well, here, check this out. On cue point, I'm going to print a float. And then I'm going to take my playback time and I'm going to convert this to a float, time to float, and I'm going to print that. And I am also going to print the label of the cue point. So now every time my track hits a cue point, you're going to see in this output log what part you're hitting. I'm going to start. All right, my first cue point, A toms, it happens at 1.56. So now I know that's where the A section is. Now this next cue point, watch this. Here it comes. Bam. A groove. Now I've labeled these cue points in Logic Pro. So that's why I'm seeing these. This is really an important video. I think this is going to open a lot of people's minds and help them. Because between the combination of custom cue points and printing these to the command, the output log, you can really get some accurate stuff. So now I see A groove starts at, this is where the cue point's located, 14.03 seconds. So now if I go here and I change this to 14.03 seconds, it's going to start right at the top of the A tom. So there you go. So now what I did is I went through, I did that, and I wrote down, all right here on an old-fashioned piece of paper, I wrote down A section, groove section, B section, outro, and ending. And then I wrote down the start times, and then what I was able to extrapolate, if I minus the B, if I take the B section start time and minus the A section, that tells me how long the A section is. And if which was 12.47 seconds. A lot of these sections were exactly 12.47 seconds because they were all 8 bars. So I know now that 8 bars is 12.47 seconds. So now what I can do is I can start this loop, okay, at 14.03, because that's absolute time, and then the loop duration can actually be 12.47. So now watch what happens, and I'll set this to loop. So this is going to keep looping over and over, but it's only going to loop this section. You hear how smooth that is too? It's like frame accurate. And so this is a way that I can now, instead of just looping the whole track, I can loop just that section. So essentially what I've created is I've created an A section loop from my stereo file. Now you can scale this out. I can do this for the A section, the intro, the B section, the bridge, and the ending. And that's what we're gonna do in this tutorial. So I wanted to show you how to do that. So remember, cue points will tell you, will trigger, and when they trigger, they can tell you the playback location exactly of the cue point. But in order to get your audio file is not going to natively have cue points in it unless it was exported with them. So every DAW is a little bit different. I don't know how to do it in every DAW, but in Logic Pro X, I have a video on how to do that. And I know you can do it in Reaper, and I know you can do it in Cubase, and I think Digital Performer, and probably Pro Tools too. So I've never done it in those, but I have a feeling they probably work similar. So go check out my cue point video. That's really important. But let's move on. Okay, so let's talk through the level blueprint. Okay, so I just dragged the Metasound into it. And what I did is I created 3 trigger boxes. This trigger box here, trigger box 1, which is here, trigger box 2, which is the middle one, and trigger box 3, which is over here. And inside the blueprint, here's what's going on. So, oh, by the way, I'm calling this trigger box gate 1, gate 2, and gate 3, just to keep it easier. And then here's the logic. It's pretty simple. When my player overlaps trigger 1, I do this loop one time. I execute the trigger parameter on my Metasound, section A, okay, and then I print it. So what that does is when I go into section A, it prints it up there on the left, and it triggers that aspect of the Metasound. Now let's look at the Metasound. MS Music. Okay, so here we are. So when I overlap gate 1, it triggers section A. When I overlap gate 2, it triggers section B. Okay? Oh, by the way, if you notice this, when I get away from that panel, gate 1, it reopens the loop. Otherwise, you could only trigger it once. So it triggers it, and then when I jump off of it, it resets the loop, so the next time I jump back on it, it will trigger the A section again. That's really important. You want to open and close that loop. Gate 2, identical. Gate 3, identical. Then the trigger ending, I have this trigger box way down here at the end. You can see it over here. That's trigger ending. And let's focus in on that. Boom, here we are. So this triggers, when I overlap, it does a do once. It executes the ending parameter, okay? Which is right here. Trigger the ending, and that's what that does. I'll show you how this works in a second. But we just need to trigger that. And when it triggers that, it does delay. It triggers the ending, and then there's a 0.5 second delay, and then I just got cute with it, and I spawned the UN ball and changed the camera angle just for dramatic effect, because I thought that would be fun. It's nice to know, like, the level's over. Kind of like an old school Nintendo vibe. Just boom, you know, spawns the winning sign and then changes the camera angle. But that's it. That's all there is to it. Now let's look at the hard part, the music section. I want to break this down in just a couple sections. So essentially what we have is, we have 3 gates, 1, 2, and 3. All of these are essentially doing the same thing, and then the ending is acting a little different. So first let's look at the Metasound. Okay, here's the Metasound. When the Metasound starts, okay, on play, we trigger a trigger repeat. And this is important because we want this trigger happening in time, because we want our transitions happening in time. We don't want some sloppy thing. So it's important that we know where the sections start and stop, and we know how to trigger them in time. In this case, I'm triggering them every bar. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Every bar at 154. So when you pull your trigger repeat out under the time thing, under the period, it defaults to 0.2 seconds, but you can drag a BPM node there, BPM to seconds, and then with that BPM node, you can make it musical. I know the track's at 154 because I made it. So we're going 154, and we're dividing it into whole notes, and we're doing every whole note, which is a measure. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, something that's important to realize, if you listen to this track, that's exactly 1 bar drum fill at the beginning. I made this track so I knew it was 1 bar, but when I bounced it, I also bounced it exactly 1 bar. So if you just start with a random track, you might have like a half a bar or something because there might be space at the beginning. So you're gonna have to figure that out, but again, that's what we use cue points for. So we figure out exactly that intro, and that'll give you the exact time. For my purposes, it was in perfect time, so I didn't have to change it. Now, we are triggering a trigger every beat, and that's going to drive this Metasound. I did a video a couple weeks ago about what I think is the most important node in Metasounds for procedural music, and this is the trigger repeat. Because what the trigger repeat does, Metasounds are frame accurate audio to the audio sample. So you're talking 1/48,000th of a frame. So we're going super accurate. So this trigger is perfectly happening in time. So that combined with my perfectly quantized audio transitions, these are gonna seamlessly transition back and forth. Now, here's the thing though. We don't want something to happen on every trigger repeat, okay? So this is why we need gates, okay? We need to set up some gate logic, and this is where it's gonna get a little complicated. So slow down, take a deep breath, and follow me here and let this sink in, because if you don't follow this, things are going to get really squirrely and hectic. And then the other thing is, once you digest this concept, you are going to it's going to really open your eyes to how Metasounds works, okay, and some of the power of Metasound. Once you figure out these gates and triggers and logic and all of this stuff, it's really going to open your eyes, and arranging procedural music is going to be a lot easier. Okay, so let's zoom out here. All right, so every time this triggers, we're going to go to this trigger ending, okay? Now, I originally had some other things going on here, which is why there's a trigger any here, but we don't need this here. So just pretend like this isn't here. We don't need it. It's not. This would just mean that if something triggered in here, these would also trigger. But we're not really using it, but I just left it there as a junction. But anyway, so we're triggering out here. And let's look at gate section A. Okay, so every time this triggers, you see this is going here. It's going here. It's going here. So it's all coming through here. This trigger's coming up through here. And it's hitting this trigger control. Now, we're not doing anything here yet, because if you look, this starts open. However, on these, they start closed. Otherwise, we'd be playing all three of these sections at a time. So let's jump over to the right to see where this ends. We have 3 wave players, 1, 2, and 3. And these wave players are set up. Let's look at them real close, okay? We've got, this one starts at the beginning, but it loops from here, here, for 12.4. So it starts at the beginning, but it loops the A section, okay? Then we come down here. This starts at the B section and loops the B section. And this starts at the bridge and loops the bridge. Now, we got all of these times from the thing I showed you at the beginning, the cue points. And then this one just starts the ending, and it doesn't loop it. It's a one-shot ending. After that, the game's over, the level's over. So knowing that, so let's treat this A section, B section, C section. By the way, all this comes into an audio mixer here. And this is just to combine all the audio, that's all. So we got 4-channel audio mixer going to stereo. All these levels are the same because it's part of the same stems. Okay, or the same stereo mix. Now, let's look at the way this gate logic's working. Okay, so this is important. Follow me here. Every trigger goes through here and here, but these gates are closed, so it doesn't go this far. Now, it goes to here. But what I have here is a trigger once. So it only does it the first time. Watch. It plays this wave file, and then it closes the gate. Now, this is still triggering, but we're not letting it pass. And we're not letting it pass because we don't want it to trigger it again. But there will be a time when we do want to trigger it again, which is what this trigger once is. So now let's look at this logic. When I hit play, this plays and it starts looping. What happens when your player goes over one of those trigger boxes? Well, we are going to trigger either section A, section C, or section B. There's 3 sections, A, B, and C. Depending on which one we trigger, it will open and close the gate. So the first thing that's going to happen is when we trigger a second section, we have to have the first section stop. And how do we do that? Well, the best way I figured out how to do it is when a new section plays, I bring this on play trigger out and I save it as a variable. So on play 1, play 2, and play 3. So now what this allows me to do is if one of these wave players starts playing, something gets triggered, it goes to this variable. These variables come back here. So here's section A. If the second section or the third section get triggered, this trigger any resets this trigger and opens it back up. Because remember, this trigger is going to be closed after it's triggered. Okay? So the first thing we want to do is, boom, this trigger's closed. So as soon as we trigger section 2, which is here to play, or section 3, it's going to come out here and it's going to reopen section 1. That way when we jump back to section 1, it triggers again. Otherwise, the gate will stay closed. So what we're doing is anytime a wave player plays, whether if section A starts, it reopens B and C. If section B starts, it reopens A and C. etc. And what this allows us to do is make sure that if we jump to B and then jump back to A starts again. Because remember, once it gets triggered, that gate closes. So we got to reopen that gate. So that's what this logic does. And then also, if you see here, here's the other kicker. When this triggers this gate to open back, meaning this basically means you jump to a different section, but we're going to open that gate back up so it's valid to play again. It also comes in here and it stops this wave player. So basically what we've done here is we've created logic that when B starts, A gate opens and A stops, C gate opens and C stops. That way we don't have any incidents. None of the wave players can play at the same time because of this logic. And then the same with the end trigger. Once I jump on the end trigger, all of these other wave players stop and you can't re-trigger them. Now let's go back up one more step. Now what we have here is similar. So we have this trigger control. When we jump to the A section, remember our character jumps on that A trigger, it opens this gate, which allows this next trigger, 2, 3, 4, 1, to open. So whatever section you jump in, it closes the other sections and then opens the section you jumped on. And then vice versa. If you jump on any of the other two sections, it will close that gate. So the next beat won't let that pass. And so essentially what we're doing is when you jump on A, it stops B and C in case they're playing. We don't know if they are, but if they are, it stops them. It reopens their triggers so the next time you jump on one of them, they can play. And it also closes the trigger control so that it doesn't play because you're already on that section. So there's some basic logic here happening. So that's what we're doing. Now, for the ending, when we jump on the ending, now I did add another trigger repeat here because if you watch this, I wanted this to happen quicker. So instead of waiting a full beat, I wanted this to happen every 2 beats. So I added a trigger repeat here. I'm basically subdividing this trigger into 2/8 notes. So now every 2/8 notes, so basically half the bar it's going to trigger. So this one's triggering 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. This one's going 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So what this allows us to do is it allows us to not have to sit around and wait a whole measure for the ending to start. And I only did this with the ending because you could do this with the other sections, but it might start not making musical sense. Sorry if the camera was shaking. I just knocked the crap out of my desk. So now what happens is we trigger this, and this ending opens this gate. And so the next 2/8 notes, it's going to trigger once, and it's going to play this ending. And then the on ending is also going to close all of the other gates right here. So this actually kills, when I trigger this ending, it actually kills this and stops that repeat so that we don't accidentally play A, B, and C, or D. And so that's pretty much it. When you're doing this sort of logic, you got to remember that you got a lot of things going on. So you got to make sure one is starting and the other ones are stopping. Otherwise, you'll get layers upon layers and it'll get out of control really fast. So you got to really think through the logic. Sometimes I find it's good to help write it out on paper to make sure you have everything right before I go into the Metasound and start scripting it, because you forget stuff. And so if you run it through your head and go, okay, like a computer would, okay, what am I going to do here? I'm going to do this, 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 and this. And then you'll have some, really good results. So anyways, I know this was kind of fast, but, again, you can kind of pause the video and see the Metasounds, but this one's really all about logic. Oh, there is one thing, though, I wanted you to see. If you drag this play out and you bring this around here, it won't let you get that variable trigger without creating what's called a loop, and it doesn't like that. So what you have to do is this technique here. If you drag this out and hold Alt, you'll see get delayed. And what that does, when you pull this variable out here, which is a trigger, you see this delayed note. That's 1 frame off after the cycle's done, and Epic made that so you can do this kind of stuff. So you don't get an audio loop happening like it plays and stops at the same time. So you have to use that trigger delay which the delayed variable, and that 1 frame delay allows you to loop it back around. So that's really important. I wanted to make sure I covered that. That's what this is with the clock. You drag your variable over, you hold down Alt, and then there it is. And that's a really important technique. I might actually cover that in another video all by itself because it's so important. But anyways, I hope this video was helpful. Thanks again for checking out the channel. Please like and subscribe. If you have a chance, feel free to leave some comments, and we'll see you in the next video.